chapter 26. Genesis chapter 26. And the verses are 12 to 25. 12 to 25. Genesis 26, verses 12 to 25.
Isaac planted in the land, and reaped in the same year 100 times what he had sown, because the Lord blessed him. The man became wealthy, his influence continued to grow until he became well prominent. He had so many sheep and cattle, and such a great household of servants, that the Philistines became jealous of him.
And with him. Now all the wells which his father's servants had dug in the days of Abraham his father, the Philistines stopped up by filling them with dirt. Then Abimelech said to Isaac, "Go away from here, because you are far too powerful for us." So Isaac left that region and camped in the valley of Jehar and settled there. Now Isaac again dug the wells of water which had been dug in the days of Abraham his father, because the Philistines had filled them up with dirt after the death of Abraham. And he gave the wells the same names that his father had given them. But when Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found a well of flowing water, the herdsman of Jehar quarreled with Isaac's herdsmen, saying, "The water is ours." So Isaac named the well Ezek, which means quarreling, because they quarreled with him. And his servants dug another well, and they quarreled over that too. So Isaac named it Sitnah, which means enmity. He moved away from there and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over that one. So he named it Rehoboth, which means a broad place, saying, "For now the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be prosperous in the land." Then he went up from there to Beersheba. The Lord appeared to him the same night and said, "I am the God of Abraham your father. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. I will bless and favor you and multiply your descendants for the sake of my servant Abraham." So Isaac built an altar there and called on the name of the Lord in prayer. He pitched his tent there, and there Isaac's servants dug a well. All right, so this is 12 to 25 of chapter 26. We're looking at Isaac. Now, you'll all agree that Isaac is a man who lived in the shadows. Because we hear a lot about Abraham and we hear a lot about Jacob. So Isaac comes in between these two giants. And he is a giant nevertheless. He is a giant nevertheless, but we never hear much about him. We never hear much about him. So he was a man who lived in the shadows. Abraham is the star of some 14 chapters of Genesis, and Jacob is the star of around 12 chapters of Genesis. And Isaac is only featured in a handful of chapters, that's all. And here, in the 26th chapter, we learn something about Isaac. And first of all, what we can say that he was a man of faith. He was a man of faith. Because if you remember from the early part of this chapters, we read that this was a time of famine. This was a time of famine, of want. People were worried about how they were going to survive because there was no water, there was no food. And Isaac was tempted to move to Egypt. But that is when the Lord appears to him and tells him to stay right there. And Isaac stays right there. Everyone else leaves, but Isaac remains there. So, because in Genesis 26 verses 2 to 5, that's just before the section that we read. The Lord appeared to him and says, "Do not go down to Egypt and stay in the land of which I will tell you." I mean, do not go down to Egypt, stay in the land of which I will tell you. Live temporarily in this land and that I will give you, and I will bless you and favor you, and I will give all these lands to you and to your descendants. And I will establish and carry out the oath which I swore to Abraham your father. So you see, God is not a God of individuals. He's a God of families, of whole families. The promises that he gave to Abraham, and he's repeating those same promises to Isaac, and then they go on to Jacob. And the present nation of Israel is a fulfillment of those ancient prophecies made to Abraham. Isaac, as I mentioned before, he is in Hebrews 11:20. He is listed among the great heroes of the faith. I mean, we don't hear any stirring stories about Isaac, but he is listed among the heroes of the faith. And we also know that he was far from perfect. Just like the rest of us, he was a human being. He was a human being with failures. In fact, he commits some of the same sins that Abraham commits by lying about his wife. And you know what God tells him there is, don't go to Egypt. Stay in this land which I will tell you. Live temporarily in this land. Live temporarily in this land. Because that is an important fact that we lose sight of. We're all here to live temporarily. We're not permanent residents. We're not permanent residents. And Isaac understood that, because this whole thing has been promised to his father, but the promises have not been realized. They're not being realized. And so he realizes that he is a pilgrim. He is a pilgrim. He's not a permanent dweller. He's a traveler. He's a pilgrim. And he moves from place to place just like his father without actually owning the land. He doesn't actually own the land. But because he has these huge flocks and there is this need of water, they keep moving from place to place. So it is in his role as a pilgrim that he gives us this idea of what a child of God should be like, who a child of God is. So the Bible clearly tells us that we are strangers and pilgrims in this world. Strangers and pilgrims. In 1 Peter 2:11. The word strangers mean a foreigner, one who lives in a place without the right of citizenship. That's who a pilgrim is. A sojourner, a stranger, one who lives without the rights of citizenship. In fact, the Bible also tells us that every saved person is a citizen of heaven.
Amen.
So actually, that is a citizenship that we are assured of. We don't have citizenship in this world. As children of God, we do not have citizenship in this world. Our citizenship is in heaven. It's in heaven. So we're going to look at this life of Isaac. So he encounters many of the same problems and experiences that we have. He encounters many of the same problems and experiences we have. And that's what we're going to look at today, at the realities of a pilgrim's life. Because all of us are pilgrims. We're walking the pilgrim's path. So first of all, what we know for sure is that it's a life of great provisions. Isaac's life is a life of great provisions, because the first thing we're told about Isaac is that everyone else was leaving. Isaac alone remains there. He sows his grain and he enjoys 100% investment, 100% return on his investment.
Amen.
Everybody else is scared, worried, they don't know what to do. And this one man remains there, and he does what he's always been doing, and he gets 100% return on his investment. So everyone was going broke and Isaac prospered. His crops flourished while the crops of others dried out. And his flocks and herds grew while the flocks and herds of others starved and died. So one man alone is being blessed. And if you remember, there's a source for this blessing. And the source is God's hand, because Isaac was obedient. Because God told him to stay there, to stay put, not to go anywhere, not to listen to anybody, but to stay in the same place. That is why he was blessed. And so in the face of disaster, because they were surrounded by disaster, in the face of disaster, he listens to God. He decides to listen to God. And that is why God blesses him. So the only advantage he had was that he knew God and he trusted him. And that was translated into blessings in his life. So people who did not know God and people who did not trust God did not experience blessings, they experienced failure. But Isaac experienced blessings. So one thing that we can understand from this is that God knows each of us in a personal way. God is a God of personal relationships. And he speaks to each person individually. You know, he spoke to one man from an entire land. He said, stay there, stay there. Most people did not know him, did not care to listen to him, did not know him. One man decided to listen to God, and God blessed him. So, now we might be looking at our situation today and saying, well, I am listening to God, I am a Christian, but I don't see 100% return on my investment. I don't see 100% return on my investment. Because everything is falling apart in my life. Nothing is prospering in my life. So, you see, the thing is, by the blessing of God, the blessing of God is not always financial gain. We need to understand that. We need to understand that. Financial gain is not the only way God blesses us. As children of God, what do we have? One, we have eternal salvation, something that can never be lost. That is more valuable than any financial gift, eternal salvation. And the presence of God in our life, we're never alone. The power of God working in our life, we're never in a hopeless situation. The promises of God active in our life, we're never without hope. And the Word of God to guide our life, never without direction. So this is what God is giving to all His children, to all those who are willing to listen to Him and to trust Him. So this is a long list. The list could go on and on. But we need to ask ourselves, are our eyes open, or the eyes of our spirit open to see whether God is really blessing us? Or are we like the rest of the world? The rest of the world only looks for financial success and they think of that as a blessing. But as believers, let us not be like the rest of the world. Let the eyes of our spirit be open and let us see how God is actually working in our lives. And so the question is, would you have the money or the master in your hand, or not in your hand but by your side? Would you have the money or the master by your side? Because if you have the master by your side, every single need of your life will be met. Money can only do so much, but the master can do anything and everything. So Isaac enjoyed the great blessings because he was obedient to the command of God to remain. So God always puts us, we always belong in the place where God puts us. Because we should never feel that when we look at other people, we might think, oh, if my situation was like theirs, I could have done this or I could have done that. No. God is a God of personal relationships. He knows us personally, and He has kept us in a place, and He wants us to bloom there. That's where He wants us to bloom. That's where He wants us to bloom. And as we read in Matthew 6:33, first and most importantly, seek His kingdom and His righteousness, and all things will be given to you. So that's what we need to do first. Seek His kingdom and His righteousness. That's all that Isaac did. Isaac is the unsung hero. Between Abraham and Jacob, there is this man called Isaac. We hardly hear anything about him. But he was obedient and he trusted God. And that was enough. God counted him among the heroes of the faith. You know, even the Bible doesn't say much about him, but God counted him among the heroes of the faith. So, this is what God wants us to do. Because God, everything is in God's hands. But He can only act when we trust Him completely. When we don't trust Him, He cannot act. The trust, the key that we have, the key in our hands is to trust Him. That is what makes God act. Because that way we are honoring Him. When we trust God, we are honoring Him. Alright, so first of all, his life was a life of provisions, because he knew where real wealth came from. He knew he acquired a lot of wealth, but he knew that the real source of wealth was from God Almighty. Because he was such a mighty man in that place. But still, you know, when the Philistines argue with him and they want to fight with him, he always gives way. He said, when the Philistines say, this is our well, even though Isaac had dug the well, he says, fine, I'll move on. I'll dig another well. That's what he's been doing. He doesn't fight with anybody. And Abimelech also asks him to, you leave the place because you're too powerful for us. He leaves the place. So that's how he's always been, because he knows that the source of his provisions is Almighty God. Amen. It is not his remaining in a place or his having something. That's not the source. Yes. That might be what he sees in hand, but that's not the source. And Isaac knew where his source was from. And we also see that Isaac's life was a life of great problems. You know, it wasn't just the accumulation of wealth. He had a lot of problems. He fought real battles too. Like I just mentioned, the Philistines were always fighting with him. They were always fighting with him. They were jealous of him because they could see the hand of God on him. They could see the blessings of God on him. They were always fighting with him. And he never goes for an encounter. He never wants to encounter them. Never ever. And so some of these wells, you know, we also read that the Philistines filled up some of the wells that his own father had dug. So those wells belonged to him. They belonged to him. But the Philistines filled them up because they did not want him to have them. So Isaac accepts all this. He accepts all this. Even though he's persecuted, he just turns the other cheek and he moves on with his life. You know, a lot of believers, especially now, we see this happening in North India. A lot of believers are being persecuted. A lot of believers. So many pastors are being attacked. And that's going on in many parts of the world, of course. But because the world can never understand or appreciate a believer. Because a believer is not a citizen of this world. Simple. Our citizenship is in heaven. It's in heaven. So whether it's a personal attack or intimidation or spreading stories, whatever it is, the world attacks us in many ways. But Isaac faced all this. And we're looking at the problems with the well. You know, the Philistines plugging up the wells that Abraham had dug. Now, what's so important about wells? The primary thing is that men and animals must have water to survive, because this was a semi-desert place, the Middle East. And without water, there is no way of living there. There's no way of living there. And so land with water was valuable land. Land with water was valuable land. And water was as valuable as oil is today. The Middle East is known for oil, but in those days it was water. In fact, all wastelands were considered to be God's lands, because they didn't belong to anybody. The wasteland didn't belong to anybody. If a man could live in a desert place, provide for his family and flocks, and open a well, that land was considered to be his land. That's all. So if you get water and you stay there with your flocks and your family, that land is your land. So to fill a well was an act of war. Filling in a well was an act of war. It was like attacking somebody. It was an act of war. And but Isaac does not respond in the way others would respond. He just swallows his pride, because he knows that the source of his provisions is not his fighting for them. That's why he knows that. And so he just moves on. And so they wanted to cheat, to mislead him, and they hated him. They were declaring war on him by seizing his lands and driving him away. But he takes it all. And he clears out the old wells. We read that some of the old wells that his father had dug, he clears them out. You know, this has a spiritual meaning as well, you know, because our forefathers in the faith have established, have taught us so many truths about the way God works. They've taught us so many truths about the way God works. And the world always seeks to cover them up, seeks to teach us to forget, to ignore such things. But we should always remember our Christian heritage. Our Christian heritage is not something that we should sweep under the carpet. It's something that we should remember. It's something that we should honor and remember. So these old wells speak of spiritual resources that were uncovered and proclaimed by our spiritual fathers in the days gone by. And if we are not careful, the world will destroy everything that we have been given. Because they're part of our spiritual inheritance. So Isaac clearing up those wells again. It talks of recovering the spiritual wealth of the past. It has a spiritual meaning. And because already the world has hijacked a lot of things from the Christian world. I think a good example is the celebration of Christmas. Because the celebration of Christmas has nothing to do with Christ. It has nothing to do with Christ. It has everything to do with Santa Claus. Right? It has nothing to do with Christ. Nothing at all. We have the Christmas tree. We have Santa Claus. We have, at least the manger and all is authentic. But the Christmas tree and Santa Claus have nothing to do with Christ at all. And yet, that's the way the world celebrates Christmas. So a lot of these things have been completely hijacked by the world. But we need to hold on to our spiritual heritage. We shouldn't lose it. And we shouldn't, should never feel complacent about these things. Because Christ was born 2,000 years ago to become a man and to die for our sins. So that's why Christ was born. There's no need to celebrate this birth of a baby every single year with Santa Claus and all those things. But that's exactly what the world does. It has nothing to do with what Christ did for us. And so we find him clearing the wells that the Philistines covered up. Wells that his father had dug, but the Philistines covered up. He's clearing those wells, and he's also digging new wells. Because we, in our Christian life, we also discover new resources. And the world argues with him about them. He lets them have it and he moves on. That's why we have those names. The first well he digs is Ezek, which means contention. And the second well is Sitna, which he names strife or hatred. Actually, interestingly enough, Sitna has this idea of laying in wait to ensnare someone. And the word Satan comes from the same root word. Sitna, Satan comes from that root word. So all these places were associated with painful memories for Isaac, because he had to fight against the Philistines at all these places. And finally, he digs this well at this place called Rehoboth. In fact, he names it Rehoboth when no one comes to argue or fight with him. That's how he names it, Rehoboth. So the Philistines try to take away what he has labored for. And that is our experience as Christians as well, because we are always fighting against the world. We're always fighting against the world. Or the world is always fighting against us. So, in Isaac's experience, this pilgrimage was one fight after the other. It was one fight after the other. So he was not a man of limited abilities or limited character. He was a strong fighter for the faith. That's who Isaac was. That's his whole life was spent fighting against the world. And the third thing so it was a life of great problems. It was a life of great privileges. It was a life of great privileges. So life was of great provisions, life of great problems, and a life of great privileges. What are the privileges that Isaac had? He had the privilege of enjoying the Lord's words, the Lord's presence, because God appeared to him. God appeared to him and reiterated the entire set of promises that he had made to Abraham. All those promises. That's the greatest privilege that we can experience. The greatest privilege that we can experience. And as we read in Psalm 119, 105, your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. And so we have his word and we have his spirit. That's how what God has given us. His word and his spirit. So this is the life of privilege that we have. And we also read that Isaac prepared an altar and he worshipped God. He worshipped God. So we have the freedom to worship Almighty God. So what an honor it is to be able to enter into his presence and to worship him and to love him. So with this privilege of enjoying God's word and enjoying God's world. So he's living in this world, but once he enjoys God's word and God's spoken word in his case, in our case, the written word, and the Spirit also speaks to us. But first he enjoys God's word, and that enables him to enjoy God's world, because God insulates him, God protects him from that moment onwards. So let us never remember that we are living in a hostile world. As Christians, we are living in a hostile world. Yet, we as believers, we live in God's world. God is around us. God is protecting us. And God has a way of bringing his best into our lives if we trust. If we trust in him, God will give us his best. That's what he does. So while our hearts beat for heaven, our feet walk on earth. So that's how a believer should be. His heart should beat for heaven while his feet are walking on earth. And God will take care of everything. Everything. As that last well, Rehoboth, that he dug. When he dug that well, the Philistines left him alone. They left him alone. Because he persevered. He didn't persevere in fighting the Philistines on his terms. He fought them on God's terms. He turned the other cheek. And so God leads him to a place where he has plenty of water. Plenty of water. That is Rehoboth. And that is where God will lead us. To a place that has plenty of water, where there are no other contenders and no one fighting for that same water. A source of unending water. That's where God will lead us. When we remain faithful. When we remain faithful to Him. So we need to drink from that spiritual well. And that's a well that never runs dry. But apart from that, we have His Word and His Spirit in us. And then God will lead us to a well that will never run dry. So the importance of prayer, the importance of meditation, these two things will keep us close to Him. Keep us close to Him. So as pilgrims, let's keep marching on. This is what a pilgrim does. A pilgrim is always marching. He's not settling down. He's not going to remain in one place forever. He's always marching on. In the tradition of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Marching on towards the beloved country. And so there may be days when the journey is rough. If we remain faithful to God, there may be days when the journey is rough, but there never will be a day when the journey isn't worthwhile. So the journey might be rough, but the journey will be worthwhile. What does that mean? The journey will be worthwhile just means that every single day we are learning more about God. We're getting closer to God. So it's not the toughness of the journey that matters. It is the worthwhile nature of the journey that matters. Because God is using this journey to teach us. God is molding us. So when we look at Isaac's life, he knew where his provisions were from. He had his share of problems, but he had his share of privileges as well, because he was faithful. And as J.H. Vincent said, we are pilgrims, not settlers. This earth is our inn and not our home. Amen. This earth is our inn. It's like a hotel. It's not our home. So let's not settle here. But let us settle one fact. We need to settle one fact in our mind. And what is that? That regardless of our journey here being a long one or a short one, its purpose is to bring glory to His name. So it's not the duration of the journey, but the purpose of the journey that's important. The purpose of the journey is always to bring glory to God. So it's not what I have achieved, what I have done, but how much I am bringing glory to the name of God. That is the only thing that matters. That's why we remember Isaac. Because Isaac, even though he was a nondescript character, not much is written about him in the Word of God, God introduces Himself as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God is proud, so proud of him that Abraham was God's friend. And Isaac and Jacob were also in that list. That's how God introduces Himself. We introduce ourselves, we love to introduce ourselves by saying that so-and-so is my friend, right? So this is how God introduced Himself, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And the only reason Isaac is in that list is because he remained faithful. He remained faithful to God. Amen.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah.